Look, I don't want to throw my name around, but I'll tell you who I am. I'm Stanley Kubrick.
I'm Stanley Kubrick, the film director.
Who have you got?
John Malkovich in the lead.
Come to see Stanley Kubrick.
There's no man of that name here.
Stanley Kubrick.
I'm Stanley Kubrick.
Story.
I'm Stanley Kubrick.
Can all the Stanley Kubricks please be quiet and eat their lunch?
Hello and welcome to UK Cinema History. I'm your host, Stanley Kubrick. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Now this week, me, Eric Trommater, will be taking a back seat to good friend of the podcast, Fiona Powell, who's going to be taking us through the 2005 film Color Me Kubrick, starring John Malkovich, that is written and directed by a pair of Stanley Kubrick's longtime assistants about a man who imitates Stanley Kubrick. Those who can remember way back to our second episode, Fiona Powell is a broadcaster, podcaster on the Things That Made England podcast with Royfield Brown, Luke Baxter, and David Crowther, and folklorist, and one of my dearest friends. And so we really appreciate you being here, Fiona, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric, and welcome to the room, everybody. I would love you each to spend a minute introducing yourselves so that we get to know your voice. And I know that you're all old hats at this, and I am not. I'm a rank newcomer to the UK cinema history, but I understand that it was founded by Eric Trommater, who you've just heard from, and also Yassi Soufi. Perhaps, Yassi, you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you all for being here. I'm Yassi. Yes, I just love conversations about movies. A cinephile, I think conversation about movies is part of cinema. It has to happen. It's necessary now more than ever. And that's why we're coming every week and talk about movies here. I think movies matter for historic aspect, for psychological aspect. And they tell stories, and every story should be told. And this one, and cinema is the vessel, is the medium now. And it should happen. That's why we're here every week talking about it.
Thank you, Yassi. Sila, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I might have some competition here because the parrots are doing their little rounds of sound. But I mostly
have them introduce themselves as well.
Music sector. That's how I grew up, and that's what I've done for many years. But two other things that are very important to me are coffee and food. And I've become very, very deeply interested in certain cinema, especially. And now I get the competition of the helicopter.
It wouldn't be a podcast without parrots and a helicopter, Sila, so we welcome these things. That would be a broadcast in a proper studio. Hi, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Fiona. I'm Hy Bender. I'm a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author and ghostwriter. I do stuff under my own name, and I also help people develop their books or their screenplays or TV pitches. And my website is bookproposal.net, bookproposal one word, .net, and I'm always happy to be here.
Thank you, Hy. And I see that we have 3 people in the room just listening. If you have something to say, we welcome it. Just put a little bit about yourself or about what you want to talk about in the chat, and I'm going to leave it up to Eric to give us a nudge and introduce me if you've got something to say, especially if it's something interesting. Today we're talking about Color Me Kubrick, as Eric said, the 2005 film. It's a comedy. comedy drama about the interesting con merchant, wide boy, as we call him in Britain, called Alan Conway, who went around amazingly for a couple of years claiming to be Stanley Kubrick. When I had a discussion with the writer of Color Me Kubrick, who is my brother-in-law, Anthony Frewin, this week, one of the first things I said to him was, Tony, how on earth could anybody get away with claiming to be Stanley Kubrick in the middle of London, where Stanley was quite well known? Tony said that it was because it was the 1990s and people really didn't know what Stanley Kubrick looked like. But, I'd like to, in fact, I did this morning argue with Tony and saying, oh, come on, I knew what Stanley Kubrick looked like, as did most film buffs. So I don't know who was stupider, Alan Conway or the people he conned. Color Me Kubrick, comedy, drama, very camp film, full of film stars, full of tremendous actors, and full of very famous people like Ken Russell doing his little pastiche in what I think was one of the funniest scenes for me in the film of Alan Conway and Peter Sallis and Ken Russell in a hospital or locked up in a madhouse, perhaps, all claiming to be Stanley Kubrick, with Ken Russell flinging his food about, saying, "No, I'm Stanley Kubrick. I'm Stanley Kubrick," and the nurse popping in to saying, "Would all you Stanley Kubricks be quiet, please?" It's a film I very much enjoyed, not just because Tony's my brother-in-law. I don't always like everything he writes, but I thought it was a tremendous film and I enjoyed it very much. I'm going to go around the room and ask each of you to speak just for a couple of minutes, please, about the film Color Me Kubrick and what you thought of it. And then we'll go on to a discussion about what might have been your favorite or least favorite moments from the film. I'm going to begin with you, Yassi.
What struck me the most about the film was this, the tragic comedy character of Alan Conway, the absurdity of fame and celebrity. That this is a theme that we talk a lot in this room when we were recently actually talking about how absurd this concept of fame and how we as people treat celebrities when we were talking about Hard Day's Night. And the film reminded me of After the Fox with Peter Sellers, as you mentioned, reminded me of Kiarostami's movie Close Up, with similar themes. A con man pretend to be a film director, and especially with Close Up because that's also based on a true story, and the desperation and the gullibility of those who fall for this, who fall for the con, and the deception of reality, the deception and the identity, how and how it is presented in the film, the satire and the dark comedy, and the amazing casting on John Malkovich that I really want to ask you about. That was it a pick? Did he choose to be in the film? Because that gives the movie I think based on his 1999 movie being John Malkovich, that some read that that portal of his brain, a portal to cinema. I think that, and here that he's imposturing a filmmaker, kind of gave this movie a very meta aspect, and the reflection on Kubrick's mythos.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Yassi. You brought up a couple of great points, which we will get onto in just a moment. And I'd love to get on to those just for a minute. And you said it absolutely correctly, the tragic comedy. It is indeed, yes, both a tragedy and as you say, a comedy. Sila, what did you think of the film? Very briefly.
I am still digesting, listening to different aspects, and truly digesting in my head what I saw as you speak, different of you, because I've only seen it once, and it's expanding a lot, even the last 5 minutes. But two of the main things that I would say is the idea that who is dumber, him or the audience or the public or the people who fall for it. I think that's one aspect. However, I'm more curious about the sadness of him being in this situation where he decides to do that. And that's why I like very much the idea of tragic comedy. Another thing that I find important is that I've heard, and many of you have heard many things about convicts, about imposters, for example, painting, claiming to be someone else. However, in this case, he offers nothing. He's taking many opportunities from people by playing to be or claiming to be Kubrick, but he's giving nothing, not even to himself, not even to so it's a very weird role that I see that he was playing from the meta observation, I would say, about film, cinema, and the mind of different individuals in this case. As Yassi mentioned, being Malkovich gives me a different, interesting way to look at this, another perspective as to how I can meta-wise analyze what Kubrick was, what Malkovich is playing, what these writers are playing, and I think it's very complex, very interesting. Thank you.
Excellent point, Sila, all of which we can come back to in just a few moments. You've made some excellent points. Thank you. Hi. What did you think of Color Me Kubrick?
Well, a few things. Time has let me first of all say I'm going to be very honest, because I think that's what a room like this is for, is honest opinions. I feel time has outpaced the film because we're currently living in a period where a con man pretending to be a multi-billionaire has a real shot at becoming president of the United States. So the being incredulous that people believe this guy being Stanley Kubrick, you've got tens of millions of people who voted for Trump. It's a movie about a guy leveraging Stanley Kubrick's fame, but that's what the filmmakers are doing. They're using Kubrick's name to make the film, so that's kind of a meta irony, because it's not a great film. It's, from my perspective, a missed opportunity. It starts out strong and then it doesn't know where it wants to go. It gets very repetitive. And the people who made this film, the director didn't generally get to direct. He worked for other directors. The writer only had one ever movie produced under his script, Anthropoid, 2016 horror film, On My Own Pace. So that's my feedback to you as the host.
Thank you. Hi. Eric, what did you think of the film?
Well, I enjoyed it, but I consider camp to be a legitimate art form. And, you mentioned Ken Russell, and his daughter, Victoria Russell, did the wonderfully campy costumes for this film. And I think that this film is in the great tradition of, Ken Russell, or, here in the United States, say Kenneth Anger, or even David Lynch. And I think it is the campiness and the meta that keeps this film entertaining enough to watch, because of course this is really a rather sad story of a broken down alcoholic, and someone who assumes somebody's identity just to get enough vodka and cigarettes to get through the day. But by dressing it up in this campy format, it makes the film far more watchable. I do have some negative things to say that we'll get to later, but overall, it's just a very, very enjoyable film.
I know I spoke to you the other day when you said it didn't bear watching twice, though, Eric. So that's an interesting comment. I'd like you to expand on that.
Well, yeah, and I was comparing it to a film that I actually thought this film was better than, that we did recently, The Death of Stalin, which has become kind of a cult classic, even though just like this one, it didn't really do very well at the box office initially. And I think the reason why was you can watch Death of Stalin several times, whereas. And Brian Cook is a top-notch pro, the director of this film. He that's why people like De Palma turned to him several times as AD. But he was very good at shooting B-roll. And what that B-roll is generally doing is imitating other directors. And in this film, he was attempting to recreate a style by using these smaller lenses that of a Kubrick film. But what Kubrick would do that Cook doesn't do is move to something like a 50 millimeter lens for, say, an interior or something, to kind of take the pressure off the audience. That where you don't have the camera literally in the actors' faces the way you do with these short lenses. He's using 9.7 millimeter Kino lenses and what they call the Gilliam lenses, and everything is just kind of in your face. And on a second viewing, when you're not caught up in the story, when you're not asking yourself what happens next, it actually becomes a little taxing to watch, especially because he's so crammed every shot with just so much gaudy detail, and you have the gaudiness of the costumes, and you add that on, and I think like some of the scenes that just didn't work on a second viewing, for instance, when he's at the hotel and he meets the singer, and the hello scene, and the over the topness of the production doesn't give it something, whereas doesn't give it a rewatchability. It actually drags a little bit because it almost becomes ugly to the eye. But right. I want to stress that you can only see a movie for the first time once, and on a first viewing, this film was crackerjack, and so I don't really hold that against it.
Thank you, Eric. Yassi, I think it was you who talked about the sort of who's conning who aspect.
Well, before we get to Yassi, I just want to follow up on something. Eric, are you sure that it didn't do well? Because according to IMDb, and maybe it's a typo, but IMDb says worldwide lifetime gross 497,000. Oh, 1,000, not million. Never mind. Okay, never mind.
Yes, it did very badly. Yes.
Back to Yassi, if you please. Yassi, you talked a little bit about the whole aspect. I believe it was you who talked a little bit about the whole con man aspect of the film that you found interesting.
Yes, but before that, Fiona, what about you? We haven't heard from you. You haven't said anything about the movie. No, you can't skip. Go ahead. Come on, share something with us.
All right.
The one, yeah.
Well, I've lived with this film before it was, like a lot of Kubrick films, because of my family situation. I met them before I ever saw them in the movies. And I certainly knew a lot about this film before it was ever presented on the big screen. I was actually staying with Tony in St Albans. And by the way, hi, Tony has been a screenwriter since 1966. He's done a number of things, just like you. Just because his name isn't on a number of things doesn't mean he hasn't done a number of things. He has been a very prolific writer since about 1965. He became Stanley Kubrick's personal assistant when he was 17 years old in 1966, and so he was very, very involved in a lot of Stanley Kubrick's films. So I know somebody asked, did John Malkovich choose to? Well, it was a discussion between, as far as I know, between Tony and Brian Cook as to who the best actor would be. And they posited the idea of John Malkovich, and he was very keen to do this. And I think he did an amazing performance because it was so awful. I know that sounds ironic, but his accent, irony is that you have an American pretending to be a Briton doing the world's worst American accent. And that was very amusing. I find the film, I've seen it a number of times. I've watched it 4 times this week. And I find it very interesting. I wonder whether someone like Alan Conway could get away with it in this day and age. And by the way, when I spoke to Tony and said to him how much of this story is actually true, he said, actually, there was a lot of stuff we just couldn't put into the film because nobody would bloody believe us. Just nobody would believe how much of a con man this man was, and how he really foxed a number of people who all, as I think you said, Yassi, felt they wanted to touch fame. And so they were prepared to believe this completely unbelievable human being. I think one of my favorite moments is in the film is when he's talking to a young man and talking about, and the young man says, I'm a huge fan of yours, and mentions a number of films, one of which being the Nuremberg film, and then says, I think you've got your Stanleys mixed up. Even though there were people out there who could have outed Alan Conway, nevertheless, there were a tremendous number of people who just believed him for God knows what reason. I find that fascinating. And as you said, I think, Sila, you said, I mean, what did they get out of it? Absolutely nothing. He contributed nothing to anybody's life, as far as I can tell. Anyway, that's my brief opinion, or not so brief opinion. But Yassi, I'm going to get back to you now.
Yeah, so this aspect of the con artist, the best thing that it always reminded me of Oscar Wilde, that he said that most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinion. Their lives is a mimic of their passion, not the reality. So I think this movie speaks to that a lot, that Alan Conway's dissociation with reality, how he creates this persona, and the fact that he, this contradiction between the fact that Kubrick himself was such a the secrecy, the recluse character of him, allow this con to happen, shows, is a criticism of, the fame and how we treat celebrities or how they present themselves to us. And, so there is this, the contrast between reputation and anonymity. I found it really fascinating that how it was represented in this film. And the whole, to me, more than the meta aspect that we keep talking about, this manipulation of the filmmaker itself, that the filmmaker that we also see in Barry Lyndon. And what the other thing that I really liked, what this subtle, you know, we don't see Kubrick. Actually, Kubrick is not used to market the movie. We don't even see someone as real Kubrick in the film. That's very interesting.
And it's part of the reality of Kubrick. I mean, my stepfather and my brother-in-law and my nephew worked with Kubrick most of my life. I never met him. I never got to meet him because he was a recluse. And unless you were part of his inner circle, you didn't meet him.
And at the same time, with the very final scenes with that journor's character, the breaking the fourth wall, he start engaging the audience, talking to the audience, this commentary on truth and fiction that you asked Anthony, that how much of the film is true and how much of it is fiction. I think the whole narrative of a guy creating another guy, this whole impersonating other person, and that breaking the fourth would kind of blur this line between the truth and the fiction. And the critic of media, that the only person who breaks the fourth wall is the journalist, that he directly try to address the audience, but at the same time we know that he had an agenda. He was also a manipulator. He was also trying to get something out of this. And the whole theme of reflection on identity, that what creates our identity? Is that a name? Is that our costume? Because the flamboyant, I think, costume design for this character and who he really was, Alan Conway, is brilliant choice that is depicted in the film. And the way to hide, I think he tries so hard to hide something of himself, either his homosexuality, either his insecurities and everything. So he needed a label, or he needed a facade. And this is all over the film, even though Kubrick is the person that he's imitating. Just like the people in the movie, we are not supposed to see him, even though we know how he looks like. That creates this atmosphere that we sometimes kind of forget that, that's what I really liked about the film, that we completely understand that era, that there was no internet and that was possible for people not to know. And that helped how that, and but ever presence of Kubrick through music. I cannot, the subtle use of music in the soundtrack that Kubrick used in the film, and they use it in a satirical way, in a comedic way. So I get back to that later.
That's very interesting, Yassi. That's very interesting. Sila, do you have more to say about the film? Were there bits that you particularly liked? Were there bits that you particularly did not like?
I really don't have any reason to speak of anything I did not like, because I just cannot list anything in that area, because for me this seems to be, without knowing anything about the two individuals responsible for it, I see this as a very interesting essay. I have no idea what is the intention of the essay, what is essaying, but I don't see it as trying to be, and I say explicitly, trying to be comedy. I don't see it as trying to be tragedy. It's just a study of a situation, especially considering that it's referring to an actual person. Now, the question in my mind is, number one, this over-the-top homosexuality, it's very, very artificial on many levels, without considering the fact that Kubrick was not homosexual, as far as I know. And the other thing is in terms of the con man. I am having little difficulties with the term because this guy, and another thing I need to mention in between to explain what I want to say, uh, we are not sure as a viewer, I am not sure as a viewer, how much of this is the personification of the real man who did it, or is this Malkovich or someone else trying to exaggerate or make it funny or whatever. So I don't know which part of the story is supposed to be speaking to me as a con man. But this particular con man, as we're calling him, to me is actually a very sick and really have any particular goal, any particular plan. He's just very spoiled by somebody, maybe his mother, maybe his father, I don't know, by life. And he has decided at some point in his life, oh, I think I'm going to. So I don't see a plan in his life in what he's doing, and
Yes,
that's
Sila, do
the
you
reason
think
I don't
do you think
think
he
about conman, just
intentionally
a person who was sick in the mind.
Sila, do you think he intentionally set out to con people, or do you think it just presented itself as something to do because he was unhappy with himself?
I think it's just opportunism. I really see, again, I don't know if this is the personification of the man who existed or a playfulness of Malkovich, but I see someone who's sick, retarded, or whatever you want to call it in a so-called um, respectable political sense. He is not intending to take advantage. He that's just that's why I refer to retarded. He just doesn't. That's what he's doing. He just woke up in the morning and decided to do that. That's the way I see the whole thing. The way I see it from Malkovich. I am just playing a game and it's working so far. And if I see that the young man says, "You confuse your Stanleys," I just look at him surprised, like a very insane person, and walk away to the next project. So he's not really, he doesn't have a concept in mind.
Well said. Eric, talk a little bit more about what you thought of the film, particularly the performances. I know that you have a lot of opinions on some of the performances. And before we get any further into the discussion, let's not forget that a good film is, or even a bad film, is just a film. It's just telling a story. And this, more than any, I think, just tells a story. It's a story that happens to be true. And to a ridiculous point, it was true. But I would be interested in hearing what you thought of some of the performances, because I know you noticed a lot of the performances in the film, Eric.
Well, we'll start with John Malkovich, which that was the genius of this film, was casting him as the Alan Conway character. If you go on YouTube, you can find the Conway actually speaking and this character is more a creation, I think, of Malkovich than it is of Tony Frewin, quite honestly, because the intonation is completely created. This over-the-topness. The real Alan Conway would not have been able to sustain a 90-minute film. He was a boring guy in a suit, the fact of the matter is, and Malkovich does these roles a lot, I think. And so sometimes, it's easy to forget just how genius he is at it, because not too long before this, he played Ripley in one of the I think it was Ripley's Game, one of the Patricia Highsmith adaptations, a somewhat similar character, and he was nowhere near as good as this. And I think the genius of this, from the perspective of Tony Cook, was just allowing him to go off the hook, and he really does, and it's what carries the film. And a lot of the sub performers, you mentioned the cameo by Ken Russell, but a lot of the little, what you would call, stunt casting in this, Honor Blackman only has a couple of lines, but I was laughing at them 3 minutes after she was off the stage. You had Richard E. Grant as Jasper, which I think that what he is probably the one exception. I don't think he performed very well in that role. It felt like line reading to me.
Yeah, he rather camped that up a bit, didn't he? In fact, there were quite a few performances that were just too campy for words.
And I think some of that had to do with the 8-week shooting schedule on this, Fiona, to be honest, because you really didn't have multiple takes, and so you didn't have people able to really find their character, because you and I both are big fans of Richard E. Grant, going back to, With Nail and I and How to Get Ahead in Advertising, and he is capable of playing a character like that without the pathos, But I think, like I said, I think a lot of that had to do with the low budget and the lack of shooting time, which is to get us slightly off topic, but it's remarkable because, of course, think about how much shooting could Stanley Kubrick have gotten done in 8 weeks. There's no way he could have completed a film. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for Eyes Wide Shut for the longest production schedule in history. But, and it is interesting.
It didn't always serve him well, though, Eric.
No, it did not. You are correct. But I think the genius was not just the casting of Malkovich, but the allowing Malkovich to take this character over. And to really, some of them are just so subtle, for instance, in the scene with Richard E. Grant, when he gives him the pen with a naked man on it, and he has to act all pretend surprised, and then, did you keep the receipt? And then just the delivery of that line is just genius. And that is somebody who just knows a lot about acting, overall, though, you're right. They played it for camp. This has got a lot more Ken Russell in it than it does Patricia Highsmith, I think.
Ironically. Hi, let's get back to you. And here's your chance to talk about your opinion on the film as opposed to just a roundup of the film.
What Eric said about Malkovich, of course, that is largely the film. There's a lot of nice bits. The thing that's weird about the film, and where I think it falters, on the one hand, you're dealing with a real story, so you might feel imprisoned by facts, and that is often a trap that writers get into. They get stuck on the facts, and they lose sight of the overall story and the flow and the rising energy of it. On the other hand, this is not devoted to facts. This is a stylized interpretation. So it's odd, given that there is. I think it starts by saying it's a true-ish story. So it's odd, given that the story isn't better. There's I think the first quarter of it is terrific. The first half of it's pretty good, and then it just gets repetitive. And given that it's not sticking to facts, it was baffling to me why there wasn't more invention, and why there wasn't an effort to get the story progressing in continually inventive and interesting and high energy directions.
Who else would like to talk about the fact that the film drifted into what seems to have been fantastical area, or the fact that, as Hai pointed out, or Hai suggested that the beginning of the film was interesting, but he wasn't particularly interested in the end of the film.
Well, there is a lack of, I agree with Hai, there is a lack of what's going to happen next after the second half. But I think by that time, you've moved into a different movie. It's a character study now. You know, it really is just, and you've kind of seen this guy's rise and you have to see his fall. And what I think is fascinating is that Anthony Frewin, who is actually the person who uncovered Alan Conway, as opposed to making himself a character and telling the story of how he uncovered Conway, decided to take the information and create the Conway character. And then upon casting, they allowed Malkovich to create a fascinating character. Whether that carries the movie for you or not is a matter of opinion. It did for me, but I can sympathize with Hai that after the second half, you don't have kind of a what's going to happen next, because you've kind of had all of the punches, so to speak, telegraphed. You realize that the press is going to catch up with him. You realize that these phone calls are, you know, and it doesn't have that kind of suspense. But again, to me, the movie that they did make, which wasn't that movie, worked for me because it not only is the Alan Conway we see on screen such an interesting character, but because of as I say, the filmmaking style, the overtop filmmaking style on a first viewing really kept it going. But to Hai's point, I had a lot of trouble watching the second half of this film on a second viewing. It dragged for me on that second viewing. So I do actually kind of sympathize with what he's saying. And in hindsight, perhaps maybe it was a lack of, hey, what's going to happen next?
Can I say, I think, first of all, when you were talking about actings, one of the, Mark Warren, as Hod, the one who points out that you got your Stanleys wrong, with Stanley Donen. He's a great actor. He wasn't like as famous as he is today, but he has a very crucial scene that I think kind of answers Sila's question about what is the grift here in this, why this guy is doing this. So what is the grift? And that answers your questions, that if you think that the movie kind of, they're like the different paces, what happens, like the difference between the pacing of the movie at the first half of it and the second half of it, I think they all played to, and the fact that he never done his research to go find out who the real Kubrick is that aspect of the movie that wants to talk about his mental health, that we question the ending of the film, that is he really a mental patient or he's not, or the fantastical aspect. So, you know, the psychological struggle with the sense of self-worth, you know, and, you know, is he a mental illness or is he a pure criminal? You know, the fragmentation of identity, I think, was so well done through editing, and that, you know, that this mind is dissociated with reality. Sometimes it gets incoherent. So even the jump cuts, it gets in this jump in time jumps, that we sometimes get lost, that how many times have passed. I think these shows his mental state and puts us into his mental issues and his psychological conflicts and his identity disorder. That's what happens there. And this search for, I think the con was the search for validation. The con is, the grift is self-worth. He's like, why this guy? is a different. Why this guy, I think, was explained to us through the way that he picked the name of his next movie by the neons of the drugstore, just like Kaiser shows it. He usual suspect the name of the film. This is the 24-hour prescription. In my opinion, the time that he created this Kubrick persona was just like that. He saw the name on the cover of magazine and he just wanted self-worth and just, he wanted to gain the same amount of, admiration. And just like that, another fragment of another trigger. For a second there, he just, through his delusion, he picked the name and he went with it.
Oh, I think also he did it for the freebies. I mean, I actually enjoyed the second part of the film, the whole bit with Lee Pratt, the whole bit with the sort of the kind of performers that you don't really get here in the United States, but that exist very much on beach and holiday resorts in Britain.
We did The Entertainer in here.
Oh,
Fiona,
okay. So you
yes.
know exactly what, except
Yes.
The Entertainer was slightly better, I would think, than the lead.
But Archie, right? But yes, but the Archie Rice type, yes.
Yeah, the Archie Rice type, only less talented than Archie Rice. I mean, Lee, and I think the whole bit of that, him coming down the stairs, this kind of rather bad seaside performer that women like his greatest fan, Mrs. V, completely adores because she loves carry-on films and that's the world she understands. And she completely believes that someone like Lee Pratt could adore someone like herself. I found that fascinating, that conning that kind of person.
And the other thing that, sorry, because Sila mentioned this, he said like he couldn't see the reason that why he was this his flamboyant, as I mentioned, like this flamboyant character, or the way that Malkovich portrays him. I think this queerness is a form of escapism for this guy, and this and also an intersection of queerness and identity suppression, and it that's it's a defense mechanism. If we want to consider his mental illness severe, we can say this flamboyance is his that he kind of that top mannerism is his defense mechanism.
And I kind of want to follow up real quick, and then I'll let you go, Fiona. But on what Sila had said about he only takes and he gives them nothing. We're only seeing the people who he's exposed to. To a lot of people, he gave them a touch with fame. There are a ton of people out there who maybe haven't heard the Alan Conway story, who think they've met Stanley Kubrick.
Including some famous people like Julie Walters, until she realized it wasn't.
Yeah, it was great until it wasn't. And what was his name? Frank Rich, the critic, which is a scene in the film as well.
Right. Because he shaved off his beard off. I mean, there are some really wonderful lines in the film. Really wonderful lines and really wonderful miniature performances in the film.
I did want to mention that regardless of him being your brother-in-law, I love Anthony Frewin. When I found out his favorite film director was Luis Buñuel, and that the way that he and Stanley Kubrick bonded was over a book of Man Ray photos on the shoot of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I just knew this was my kind of guy, and I read a novel that he wrote called London Blues about the making of stag films in the late 1950s that ends with the Profumo affair. I love his style of writing and his ear for dialogue, and there are just 100 quotable lines in this film, like so many that you sometimes miss some, and so it kind of was worth a rewatch because I was like, I had missed that line. He is just absolutely a wonderful, talented writer.
Thank you. He'd like to hear that.
I know exactly where to look to find what I need. And then he reached down the guy's pants.
There you go.
Great.
There's one point I wanted to mention in terms of the conversation about part of the film, the beginning of the film, and then it ends up, not going anywhere as dynamically as the first half. I need to mention what I said earlier about the essay. And for that reason, I don't see that as a problem. It doesn't bother me because I don't see this as a regular story, especially without a so-called hero's journey. This guy, once he notices he's not getting much further and people are starting to pursue him, to sue him or whatever they want to do, then he's running out of possibilities. And to me, that is that's why for me it dissolves into nothingness. He's just in this bathing place, and the credits come up, so it disappears because the dynamic, he cannot do anything more, and he's not a regular thinking person, so he just gives up, and that means just nothing happens anymore.
But that's what really happened to the real Alan Conway. He kind of just disappeared up his own lack of reason, really. He's a very sad character. A very sad character.
Died of a heart attack 3 months before Stanley Kubrick did in 1998. And his son discovered the body 2 days later.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I meant with the meta.
Yeah.
That the combination of this particular person who really existed and was a sad figure, and then we look at Malkovich, he's portraying a sad figure referencing to this guy, but he's a completely different person. So we're looking at a story or a line or an essay from many different perspectives in terms of what are these two trying to tell us.
Yeah, and in the interview that I put in the chat with Anthony, he said something really funny at the end of the interview, and he says the biggest irony was that at the end it was Kubrick who imitate him, that he died 3 days later after Alan Conway.
But back to the meta aspect, this film is a film buff's dream. It is filled, and I know I get into the camera angles, and I know I get into the lensing too much, but it is filled with so many film references. The name of the band is Exterminating Angel after the Luis Buñuel film. Bestill my 18-year-old art house cinema heart. The high overhead shots of the interior moving to that really wide angle when we're inside of his apartment, reminding us, the opening shot reminding us of A Clockwork Orange, right down to the bowler hat, but except now they're dressed in punk outfits as opposed to teddy boy outfits. I mean, it's just crammed full of, between Frewin as a writer and oh crap! I've forgotten his name all of it. Brian Cook's direction. It is the meta on top of meta. The fact that he wants to cast John Malkovich in 3001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, I love that. Those are my favorite elements of this film.
Yeah, and as Yassi said, the music.
Well, along the same lines regarding the music, he says as Kubrick that he's going to cast this band because he wants an unknown. But in fact, they were a relative unknown, I think. The band Head On was handpicked from 400 bands that they looked at. So what he's saying he was trying to do as Kubrick is what they actually did in the film in the casting of the heavy metal band that they ended up using.
Oh, and one more on the meta, and then I'll let you go, Fiona. That shot where he's going from his apartment to the laundromat is shot with a special lens called a Kinopic 9.8 millimeter. And it is supposedly the smallest lens, the widest angle lens that you can use without getting what's called the fisheye effect. That, you know, how fisheye lens rounds things, except it does round things. You can actually see it is rounded, and the playing of all those Sprach Zarathustra leading into the Strauss waltz, the pairing of the two Strausses from during that is, to me, as funny a scene, because all he is doing is walking into a laundromat and putting his clothes in, about as a parody of a Kubrick film or a shot at a Kubrick film as I have ever seen. You know, and the knowingness of this, and the fact that these two people, who, you know, Cook and Frewin, second generation people in the film industry, spent so much of their lives working with Stanley Kubrick, are able just to create that. The film would have been worth it just for that one moment.
I just wanted to say about the music, because you mentioned, I wanted to go a little bit through details of music. I wish we could play scenes, but just because we can't, I just, you know, because to me, it's always this cultural shorthand, to cast someone that has already an audience's mind associated with something else, playing music that already in Kubrick fans or people who know Kubrick and the movies, it kind of represents something in their mind. That use of mise en abîme in movies, I found that always very, very smart. So the beside the very Clockwork Orange opening prologue of the film, the famous Strauss that is used in 2001 Odyssey, that, you know, this visionary space epic, and people like always talks about it as this space opera. Here, the way that, you know, they use it as to when, like in the fanfare scenes, that when to kind of that scene that always reminds people of that grandiose arts and genius of Kubrick, and it contrasts with the scene that he's just walking, and, you know, this guy, like a vagabond aspect, that ridiculousness of his scheme, that contradiction, that juxtaposition, I found that really interesting. The other time that we see it is with Frank Rich, at the end, through the end, that we hear the famous, again, the Strauss, the Blue Danube from Space Odyssey, that, you know, there it's kind of, again, it's always synonymous with that graceful movement of a spacecraft and all that. And here it's this comedic aspect that even the doctor is like a scammer, a con artist. This journalist is a con artist, and we kind of have to ask ourselves: we ask ourselves, was that the genius of that filmmaker, or are we as audiences willingly decide to be manipulated by this name Kubrick, by this is it really, or is it just the gullibility aspect of us people towards worship of celebrity, and this absurd element of, you know, aren't we the kind of being manipulated every day in our daily lives? Is this suspension of disbelief? Is it towards famous people? Or no, we are dealing with it every day.
Absolutely. So, Yassi, may I ask, this film, loved it, hated, would watch it again?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I really loved it. I loved the low budget. I think what you can do. This movie shows that what you can do with low budget and taste. This movie shows that if people with that worked with Kubrick, they come together to kind of pay homage to the film. But if you're smart enough, you don't kind of do another worshipping. What you do is you create something like this. You tell another person's story that seek this, affirmation. Someone who tried to find a narrative with this person that they worked with throughout years. And I think what they did, what Anthony and Brian did, is a very humanistic thing with cinema and also playing homage.
Thank you, Yassi. Hi. So, in conclusion, this film, did you love it? Did you hate it? Would you watch it again?
Well, I think I've already expressed that. There's a lot of wonderful bits, as Eric mentioned, and I agree with the some of the highlights that Eric pointed out. In terms of people listening who haven't watched it, I would recommend watching the first half and enjoying the wonderful moments. And the second half, if you want to fast forward through some of it, it's okay because it does get repetitive. It seems the second half is almost a little bit pointless. And again, there's an interesting, so this is a structural thing rather than a moment by moment. It's well written, but structurally, it doesn't seem to have anywhere to go after the first half. And it's interesting because on the one hand, you're dealing with a real story. So how much do you want to commit to that? On the other hand, you're making stuff up. How much do you want to commit to that, and as a result, heighten the drama by making up stuff to make it an increasingly interesting story? And this film is kind of in between. I feel like it doesn't want to make a choice between one or the other, kind of in the middle. And that's always a dangerous place to be, in the middle. So it's not sufficiently sticking to the facts to where it has this feeling of veritas, to give it more of a feeling of, oh my God, this stuff really happened. On the other hand, not enough of throwing the facts away to create an increasingly level of energy as the story progresses. And as Sila mentioned, lacking a clear character arc where at the end there is some kind of transformation for somebody where the audience feels this satisfaction, this emotional satisfaction of a payoff. And so at the end of the film, they can say, I really enjoyed that. I'm going to tell my friends to see it, which goes to the box office. So it's definitely an interesting film. I'm glad that we covered it, and I'm certainly grateful to Fiona for coming in and giving an inside perspective on it. It's a mixed bag for me, but it's definitely an interesting film, and of course, it's an amazing showcase for John Malkovich's skills. And it's interesting. I'm glad I saw it.
Thank you. Sila. Would you see it again? Do you like it? Did you dislike it? What do you think?
So, other than most of you that I listen to regularly or once in a while, you have seen a lot more films than I. I have probably seen not more than 300 in my life for reasons I don't want to go into. And there's only a handful that I think are really bad. But my point is that my experience with watching films, I've been very lucky to watch very good films, at least that I consider to be good. For example, a lot of stuff from Bergman. But if I choose what are the best films I've seen, there's a lot of them. So it's for me difficult to say um, anything bad about it. I think it shows me every time I see a film, for the most part, I see different layers of artistry, of humanity, of problematic topics. So I can only suggest watching it and taking it for what is worth. But I cannot discount this movie as anything bad. It's one way of addressing the phenomenology of how we exist. I would watch it again because I know I missed a few things, and yeah, I'm very, like Hai said, I'm very glad I saw it. I'm very glad it was suggested, and I think the performance of Malkovich is incredibly good.
Thank you, Sila. Eric, just to sum up, would you watch it again? And
Probably
again,
not.
and again?
Maybe in a year or so. Watching it twice in the same week, though. But that doesn't mean it's not a great film. And for me to call this a great film, I, of course, have to embrace that side of me that says camp is a perfectly legitimate art form. And so the only warning I would have to an audience, if you can't stand a Ken Russell film and you don't get David Lynch and you just are turned off by drag shows, and just can't embrace anything or can't differentiate between camp and kitsch, then you probably aren't going to enjoy this film at the level that's required. But if you can embrace your inner campy you, then there is a lot to be treasured here.
Thank you, Eric. And I think that just about sums us up, doesn't it? As for me, I'll just remind you, as a storyteller, a story is a story is a story. It doesn't have to mean a thing. It can just be a bloody good story. And I thought this was a bloody good story, told amusingly, loved the performances, and I'd watch it once a week just for Ken Russell throwing his food about, saying, "I'm Stanley Kubrick." That, for me, was the comedic moment virtually of my life. Thank you very much.
Can I say something? Can I say something?
Of course, you may say something. You may say something.
When Sila said it can be an essay, Daniel Dennett has a theory, has an essay about the theory of self, the gravity of self. And he says that self is constructed through the stories that we tell about ourselves. So it doesn't matter that if how much of this film is true or how much of this is fiction. The film engages with the theme of deception and performance and the reflection of how like individuals create this narrative to navigate their lives. The way he's a con artist. We call them con artists because Conway, he crafts self to feel like to give value and meaning to his to his falsehood, to all his mistake. The theme of homophobia. That it's so well done in the film. This societal perception of sexuality, how others like the way that others talk about his the money that he spent on gay bars or on magazines. the way that the movie addressed all those things without being preachy, and the commentary of all that surrounding masculinity and sexuality, and how this film highlights this tension between personal identity and the self that we create and external the expectations, and how we create the story that through cultural norms, or what we want to be, or how we can influence others and have impacts of the others, just like Kubrick has had that impact of others just by his name and genius.
Thank you, Yassi. Back to you, Eric.
All right. Once around, I just want to get everybody to anything you need to plug and where people can find you on the internet, if you want to be found on the internet. And then I'm going to, I will do that in PTR order, starting with hi, and then I'm going to preview our spooky season here as we do the end of September and October here at UK Cinema History. So hi, anything you want to plug, and where can people find you?
Thank you, Eric. Again, if you want help with a book or a screenplay or a TV pitch, please visit my website, which is bookproposal.net, or secondarily for scripts, highonyourscript.com. And thank you, as always, to Eric for this wonderful podcast, this wonderful room, and focusing on films that people might not otherwise be aware of or otherwise watch. Always appreciate the opportunity to see films that I wasn't aware of. So thank you, Eric, for that. And Fiona, thank you for guest hosting today.
And Fiona, do you want people to find you online? Number one. And number two, do you have any projects that you want to talk about?
I work in the oral tradition. You'll find me where you find me. Thank you.
She's also on a great podcast called The Things That Made England with Royfield Brown, Luke Baxter, and David Crowther. Not a lot of new episodes, but look them up on your podcatcher. A lot of great episodes, and Fiona does wonderful work there. Sila, any rooms you got coming up, and the name of your website?
First of all, thank you very much for this room, and Fiona, many thanks for this very unique insight information into the film and some parts of the world of Kubrick. The thing I'm working on right now, I am not sure how I will complete it, but as you might know, I work a lot with celebrating people's birthdays. And on the 25th, there are a few people with birthdays. Glenn Gould, Faulkner, Shostakovich, Rothko, and Almodovar. So I'm trying to do a marrying of these six individuals in some way. So if it works, I will expose it. If not, next time. And if you want to find me, silablume.life is my main website. Thank you very much.
Stick with me on this. Alda Malvar adapting a Faulkner novel using a Glenn Gould piano guitar. Okay, and Yassi, where can people find you online, and any upcoming projects you want to talk about?
After talking about the movie, which one of the things is obsession with image and identity, I think I'd rather stay quiet and and I pass it to you. Let's talk about the spooky season.
All right, so coming up on UK Cinema History, we're going to start off our Halloween celebration next week with the Abominable Dr. Phibes, starring Vincent Price. This is a film that's available on YouTube in one of those fun television editions where they have a host, and or you can get it on Tubi also for free. And then we're going to have another guest episode. The Matt Bradley Churigi is going to take us through the television show from Channel 4 called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. That was from 2004. And then for the rest of October, it's Hammer Time. We're going to be doing The Curse of Frankenstein from 1957, Horror of Dracula from 1958, both starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And then we're going to end with The Damned, directed by Joseph Losey, the American expatriate who had to flee due to the McCarthy witch hunt. So that's our schedule coming up. If anyone wants to contact me, I am at ETROMMATER on the artist formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. Otherwise, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, Fiona, for guest hosting. We love it when we can have you here. We realize that Thursday at 5 p.m. doesn't work as well with your schedule, but anytime you're free, there is always a seat on this panel for you. Thank you, Hi Bender. Thank you, Yassi Soufi. Thank you, Sila Blume. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Christopher, Alexi, and Self for being in the audience. This is so much easier when we have an audience to speak to. And unless anybody has anything else to say, I'm going to be closing this room in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.